There was a time, quite ordinary in appearance, yet dreadful in its inward condition, when my soul was haunted by a persistent ache, one which no amount of busyness, study, or laughter could seem to drive away. The days passed like shadows, and my thoughts were as tangled as brambles in a forgotten wood. Fear was not always dramatic. It didn't thunder like a storm. It seeped in like fog, slowly, patiently, until one's own self felt like a stranger. It was not the fear of death exactly, nor the fear of poverty or illness, though those occasionally knocked at the door. No, it was subtler than that. It was the fear of being, of existing in this world without certainty, without anchor. Fear that all was meaningless, that my thoughts were too broken to be mended, that no voice would answer if I cried out into the dark. At such moments, even the noblest truths feel like shadows, and the brightest rooms become dim. I searched many books. I sat in libraries as if they were temples. I tried philosophy as one tries a locked door, hoping the handle might turn this time. I even rehearsed the logic of hope, its premises and conclusions, like a scholar preparing a lecture. But hope, when dissected too often, tends to bleed out. It needs something more than theory. It needs blood and breath. And then, like a single candle in a cave, a verse found me, not as a bolt from the heavens, but as a whisper that reached me in stillness. A sentence both simple and shattering. Perfect love casteth out fear. There it was, not a doctrine, not a command, a truth. Perfect love casteth out fear. It didn't tell me that I must try harder to be brave. It didn't scold me for my weakness. It didn't urge me to deny that fear existed. It simply told me what love does, that it casts out fear, not coexists with it, not negotiates with it. It casts it out, drives it away, as light drives out darkness, not by argument, but by being. And the love it speaks of is not mine. It is not the frail affection that I sometimes manage to offer others. It is not the anxious, striving kind of love that worries about its worth. It is perfect love, unshakable, selfless, whole. A love that does not originate in me but encompasses me, surrounds me, upholds me. That truth did not cure me in an hour. It did not erase all anxious thoughts, but it gave me a new gravity, a new center. If perfect love truly exists, and if it is directed toward me, not because I earned it, but because of the one who gives it, then fear has no lasting home. It may visit, but it cannot live here. I began to see that much of what I fear, rejection, failure, insignificance, had already been answered. Love had already spoken. I was not adrift in an impersonal sea. I was known, and the one who knows me does not merely tolerate me. He loves me, not just in part, but completely. That is what transformed my mental health. Not just a change in mood, but a change in foundation. What I once tried to reason my way into, I now received as gift. What I once tried to suppress, I allowed to be cast out, not by force, but by love. That verse, just a fragment of scripture, became for me a doorway out of shadow. Fear is not defeated by logic, but by the presence of perfect love. Fear often appears to be a problem of the intellect, a confusion of thoughts, a misunderstanding of reality, a failure to assess the situation clearly, and so we attempt to combat it with rationality. We make lists of pros and cons, we remind ourselves of statistics, we rehearse logical arguments that are meant to calm the storm within us. But fear, especially the kind that resides deep in the soul, does not submit to syllogisms. It does not respond to reason the way a student responds to a teacher's instruction. It is older, more primal, and far more stubborn. It clings not to our ideas, but to our instincts. And so, while our minds may grasp the improbability of our fears, our hearts continue to tremble. This is because fear is not merely a problem of thought. It is a problem of presence. We are not so much afraid of danger as we are afraid of being alone in it. We fear abandonment, isolation, the idea that no one stronger than ourselves stands with us when the shadows fall. Logic might inform us that the worst is unlikely, but it cannot assure us that we are loved in the midst of our weakness. It cannot guarantee that we are held when we feel ourselves unraveling. This is where the notion of perfect love enters, not as a doctrine to study, but as a force to encounter. Perfect love does not argue with fear. It does not sit down with it and explain why it ought to leave. Perfect love casts it out. It is the very presence of something stronger, purer, more real than fear. And that presence is not an abstraction or an idea, but a person, a living, breathing, holy person whose love does not waver, whose patience does not wear thin, whose commitment does not falter when we feel most unworthy. Fear flees not because we convince it to go, but because love arrives. It is the difference between hearing someone say, "You are safe," and having someone stand beside you, eyes fierce with compassion, arms ready to hold you, heart full of understanding. The former may ease the mind temporarily. The latter breaks the power of fear completely. Many of us live as though fear must be defeated by discipline, by effort, by self-control. We grit our teeth, we repeat affirmations, we pretend to be strong, but perfect love does not require performance. It does not wait for us to prove ourselves worthy. It enters the room while we are still shaking and speaks peace, not peace as an idea, but as a presence. This love is not earned by the brave. It is given to the trembling, and in its light fear becomes a trespasser, an intruder with no legal right to remain. It is cast out not with violence but with tenderness, not with rage but with truth. This is the power of love untouched by conditions, unmoved by failures, unspoiled by doubt. To know perfect love is to be changed from inside out. It does what arguments cannot do. It reaches places untouched by sermons and theories. It calms the nervous system, soothes the restless thoughts, steadies the hands, dries the tears. It wraps around the soul and says, "You are not alone, you are not forgotten, you are not in danger." And not just temporarily, but eternally. Fear cannot coexist with perfect love, not because it is convinced to behave, but because it is evicted by something infinitely greater. This is not a technique or a strategy. It is a reality more solid than anything fear can present. And once the heart sees it, truly sees it, the grip of fear begins to loosen, not all at once, but with every encounter with love that is real, love that stays. Love that fights for us even when we cannot fight for ourselves. True healing begins when we realize we are fully known and fully loved. There is a fundamental difference between being tolerated and being truly loved. One can be surrounded by people, even admired by them, and still feel utterly alone inside. The fear that lives in the quiet spaces of the human heart is not always about outward circumstances, but about the aching suspicion that if people truly knew us, fully, deeply, without filters or masks, they would turn away. This belief creates a kind of prison in the mind. It fosters anxiety, drives perfectionism, breeds shame, and fills silence with the imagined disapproval of others. And when that fear is present, it poisons everything. We become unable to rest, to trust, to speak honestly, or to receive comfort. We hide even from ourselves, curating versions of our identity we hope will be accepted, all the while convinced that the real self must remain concealed. The turning point comes not when someone affirms our polished mask, but when someone looks into our soul, sees the very worst, and does not flinch. When love reaches us at our most unguarded, our most insecure, our most flawed, something changes in the architecture of the heart. This kind of love does not operate on conditions. It does not ask us to clean ourselves up first, to achieve, to impress, to heal before we are worthy. It simply comes, and it stays. To be fully known and still fully loved is the antidote to fear. It answers the oldest questions in the human soul. Am I enough? Do I matter? Will I be left behind? Perfect love answers yes. Yes, you are enough, not because of your performance, but because of your worth in the eyes of the one who made you. Yes, you matter, not just to a passing crowd, but to the eternal heart of love itself. Yes, you will never be forsaken, because the love that holds you is not temporary, not based on mood or merit, but rooted in unchanging grace. This is not a sentimental or shallow kind of love. It is not the easy affection of fleeting romance or polite society. It is fierce, intentional, sacrificial. It is the kind of love that walks into the darkest corner of your story and does not turn away. It is the kind that enters the mess and begins to rebuild not from the outside in, but from the inside out. And as this love begins to take root, the symptoms of fear, overthinking, shame, panic, despair begin to lose their power. They may still rise, but they do not reign. They no longer have the authority to define who you are or how you live. To be fully known and fully loved does not mean we are never corrected. It does not mean we are never challenged. But even correction changes when it comes from perfect love. It is no longer condemnation. It is transformation. It no longer crushes. It calls forth. It no longer shames. It frees. This kind of love can hold our sorrow without rushing to fix it, hold our weakness without disgust, hold our failures without rejection. It holds, not because we are easy to love, but because love itself is patient, kind, and enduring. When this love is experienced, truly experienced, it creates a kind of courage that no motivational speech can summon. It makes confession possible. It makes vulnerability livable. It opens space for joy, even in suffering, because it assures us that we are never alone. It restores dignity, revives hope, and whispers peace in the storm. This is what heals the mind, not just silence, not just space, but love that is present and unshakable. The more deeply this truth is believed, the less room fear has to dwell, and not because we've banished it by willpower, but because the soul, finally convinced of its belovedness, no longer makes room for anything less. One verse, rightly understood, can reshape the entire foundation of our mental and spiritual life. There are moments in life when the noise of the world grows so loud that even the most thoughtful mind cannot find clarity. In those moments, soul aches not for more information, but for something stable, something ancient and true enough to stand when everything else begins to collapse. We live in an age obsessed with novelty, with endless streams of content and countless voices offering their opinions, their arguments, their answers. But none of these can quiet the deeper cries of the heart unless they carry the weight of eternal truth. In the midst of anxiety, self-doubt, and spiritual weariness, one single verse from Scripture can pierce through the fog with more force and clarity than 1,000 well-argued explanations. It does not need to be long, nor poetic, nor complicated. It only needs to be true. The verse that says, "Perfect love casteth out fear," is one such example. It does not merely instruct or inspire, it reveals. It reveals the nature of love, the power it carries, and its direct opposition to fear. It tells us something that we do not discover on our own, that fear is not something we must simply endure or negotiate with, but something that can be cast out entirely, and not by strength, but by love. That one sentence rewrites the entire understanding of emotional and spiritual healing. It lifts the burden from human willpower and places hope in a divine force that is not earned, but received. To internalize such a verse is to shift the ground beneath your feet. It begins to transform the way you understand yourself, your struggles, your past, and your future. Rather than viewing mental health as a project of constant effort, constant management, and constant failure, the verse reframes it as a matter of identity and relationship. If perfect love is real, and if it is present and active, then fear, no matter how loud or persuasive, is no longer inevitable. This one truth, absorbed over time, gently dislodges the lies we have believed about ourselves. Lies that say we are alone, that we must prove our worth, that we are too broken to be whole, that peace is out of reach, that love is always conditional. Each of these begins to unravel under the light of that one verse. It also reorients how we approach healing. Instead of trying to analyze every source of fear or track down every root of anxiety, we begin to ask a different question. How deeply do I know this love? Have I let it enter every corner of my heart, even the ones I have hidden in shame. The goal becomes less about solving a problem and more about receiving a presence, and that changes everything. It shifts the focus from striving to resting, from earning to trusting, from controlling to surrendering. This shift does not mean pain disappears or that the mind never wavers again, but it means the battle is no longer fought alone. This one verse is not simply a phrase to be quoted, but a reality to be lived. When remembered in the quiet of the night, when whispered in moments of dread, when spoken over the heart like a promise, it becomes more than words. It becomes foundation. The mind begins to cling to it not out of superstition, but out of recognition. It resonates because it is the truest thing in the room. It is the light that refuses to be put out by darkness. It is the answer not only to questions of theology, but to the raw and aching cries of the human condition. It does not require eloquence to believe. It does not demand perfection to be effective. It simply waits to be received, and in receiving it, the transformation begins, not as a sudden flash, but as a steady unfolding. The way one sees the world begins to change. The way one speaks to oneself softens. The burden of trying to be enough begins to lift. All because one verse carried within it the fullness of a truth that every heart was created to hear, and every soul longs to remember.